So there's a number of different approaches for that. I'll just revert this quickly. All right, I just want to check one of my preferences here. Okay. All right, so let's say if I have a snare. Okay. Okay, so let's just say I wanted to draw in okay. So, you could do stuff like this. So let's say you wanted to go right, and now I could do, let's say, eighth notes. All right, so let's say we have a part that sounds like this. All right, and then I'll just put in some 30-second notes. All right, so let's say we do kind of a rhythmic build up, and I'm like the worst EDM person, but let's just go ahead and all right. So as we listen to this, we'll just, all right, not sure why it's stuck. I'm only playing back from, we just, all right. So some people will just, and depending on the instrument itself, I'm not sure if Groove Agent responds to pitch bend, but we'll give it a shot. So let's say if I just wanted to, all right, so, but let's go ahead and say I'll just render this quickly to an audio file. So come over here. Okay, so now we have our audio file. So let's say I will now select that. Let's go to direct offline processing, and let's go to our pitch shift. And I'll reset this. All right, and now. So you could do, some different stuff like that. You could also, put it into the sampler track and be able to kind of manipulate it as well. So a number of different ways of kind of doing different pitch shifting of snares. So even if you wanted to, take one of the samples, and let's say if I just drop this into a sampler track, We could then kind of trim the starts. And then we'll just so here we could actually set our pitch bend range. So if I wanted to take just this particular note and drop in, let's say on our sampler track, so I think we're going to be at I'll just draw this in. So I'll just come right over here, and I think this will respond to and I'm just going to look at I'll just draw this in quickly. That's 30-second notes. All right, so say if I have, so now I could come right over here, and I think this will respond to pitch bend. And we can set the pitch bend range within the sampler track itself. So if I just wanted to come here, so you could, just set different amounts. There's a couple of different approaches. Let me just talk to my son real quick. All right, my son has started his spring break. All right, so. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we have a question from Robbie Bowling. So let me just open up a quick project. Okay, so Robbie's question, this isn't a major issue, but I still struggle with the musical mode, cues, the when and how. So just think of musical mode as like if you're recording your own projects, you may not need to use musical mode. When you'd want to use musical mode is when maybe you have a project and you're bringing in like a drum loop or something like that, and you want that particular audio file to match, everything that you're doing. So at this point, if I wanted this loop to select and be in musical mode, I could choose for this loop to be in musical mode. And as I adjust the tempo, so think about like this is automatically, when it's in musical mode, it's automatically going to just follow the tempo that you have on a particular project. So it's going to slow down when I change the tempo. And if I speed the tempo up, that's what musical mode is going to do. So often, if you're just recording your own tracks, you probably don't need to put those into musical mode unless you're like, oh, I want the whole song to be faster. At that point, you could place it into musical mode. But if you want other songs, other audio files to match the tempo of what you're doing, that's when you could enable musical mode. And that just allows you to have the timing of the audio match the timing of the actual metronome. So when you go to play it in, you could audition and that audio will speed up and slow down to match the tempo that's going on in the particular audio file. All right, so we have a question. Sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. Bear with me while I jump back. Okay, so we have a question. Having Halion 6 and Groove Agent full versions, does it make any sense having the SE versions as well? If so, should I uninstall them or is it better to hide them, and how? So I would say that if you had the full version of Groove Agent, that Groove Agent SE could be, that all those capabilities are in there. I would say that, Halion Sonic SE and the full version of Halion, I think still makes sense to have Halion, for a lot of people just looking for quick sounds. And if you work with MIDI files, if you needed to hide them from your project view, you could just, again, go to your studio menu, to your VST plugin manager. And at this point, let's say if I just jump over here to my default, you could choose, just come right here and say, okay, I don't need to see Halion Sonic SE. And then, you could just kind of duplicate this collection. So let's say I'll just do a new collection, copy the current collection. Okay, so I will just kind of come over here. We'll call this collection Mark. Okay, and in this one, I can say I don't need to see Groove Agent SE because I have the full Groove Agent. So I go to my drums and then I could just delete that. And now when I go to add my instruments, so I will just click here. Let's add an instrument track. I go to drum, my Groove Agent SE isn't there. So that's all you have to do is you could just, do a new collection, copy the existing one, and just hide the plugins that you don't want to see. So I would say that, Groove Agent SE could be unnecessary with the full version of Groove Agent, but Halion Sonic SE could still offer some other components that maybe that could take you longer to find in the full Halion 6. So it's the same information kind of presented in a more kind of friendly format. So just that's how you could do it with kind of your different plugin collections. All right, so we see, hi Greg, any plans to implement modern drum pattern step sequencer like in Cubase future version? So, there are some already. So a lot of people may not realize that there's a MIDI plugin for Beat Designer. So if you wanted to come here, we could just say, okay, as I'm playing, and I will just solo only my Beat Designer stuff. I'm here. I could just say, okay, how many steps do I want it to be? So let's say, okay, I want it to be 32 steps. Then I could just come over here if I saw the right one. Let's make sure I'm on the... So, if you wanted to just... So let's say if I'll just do maybe 16 steps. And let's say, okay, just put in a couple. And I want to put in flams. And I wanted to have different grooves, change the dynamics. So you could do stuff like this. Now, if you wanted to also just program directly in the drum editor, which is probably, the most comprehensive, So here I could just say, okay, I want to do, let's say, one measure. At this point, I could just say, okay, as we play, I just wanted to kind of paint notes in. So let's say, okay, let's just put in, see if I'm on the right kit here. So, and you could choose to just kind of do all of your different programming here. So let's say, okay, let's start off with, a kick. So let's say I want to clap, and I want this one layered. And I want to put in 16th notes. But let's say I just want it to arc. And I wanted to just take my hi-hats here, and then, if you wanted to quantize and say, okay, let's just put more swing just on the hi-hats. And then, just coming over here, just randomly, okay, I want to take a little bit of and now every time that I click on one particular lane, I could adjust the velocities for that particular lane. But let's say if I wanted to come here and I wanted this this bongo to be entered in eighth note triplets as I kind of paint notes in. So I could even just come here and I'll erase all of, let's say, So if you want to do more kind of polyrhythms, so I want this to be eighth note triplets as I enter them in. And I wanted this to be 16th note triplets. I wanted that velocity to arc up and down. So you could obviously just kind of do and come up with different. So let's say I want to do a 32nd note fill here. So, you know, all sorts of stuff that you could do with the functions that are already there that a lot of people kind of don't utilize. Making drum parts. All right, so sub 403 wants people to hit the like button. All right, so we have a question. Can you pitch shift complete songs? Certainly. So all you have to do is, let's say, if I'll just take this project here. If you need to drop the key, you could add what's called a transpose track. So let's say, okay, we're going to do and you could just so that's just using the transpose track, and you could change it at different points of the song. You know, you could also just select all of your let's say I wanted to take all of my parts here. You know, I could choose to just I could choose to come here and just, if I select kind of not the drums, I could just choose to, now the drums aren't transposed. So you could do stuff like that as well. All right, so we have Michael checking in from Somerset, UK. Hi, Greg. How would you export stems if you're using the arranger track? Is it any different than a normal export? I think that you might have to flatten the chain first. So let's say I'll just test. I haven't done this in. Let me just. I think I have something with arranger track that we could. All right, and my Keybase didn't like that project. Sorry about that. All right, so let me just see if I get that project back. Okay, so here if I wanted to activate the arranger chain, so when we do this, this will play back the project in without any of the so as we place back, let me just get it so you guys could hear as well. So this will play back in kind of a non-linear fashion. So when it gets to the end of a chain, so I think if I go to export that with my audio mix down, and I will just do a quick stereo out. Let's add it to the queue, and I'll insert it back into the project. All right, I'm just going to undo that just because I had I will set my arranger track around the whole event here. Set my left and right locators. I'll do that one more time, sorry. So I think you might have to flatten it first, but I'll just test and see. Okay. Yeah, so to have the arrangement, what you'd have to do is as you go to the arranger track, just to flatten the chain. And then once you flatten the chain, it will, at that point, take into account all of the new arranger chains. So you just have to flatten the chain first, and then you export, and then it's just a normal export. All right, so you should see from questions, sometimes when I change audio to musical or formant, it changes all other instances of that event and all other cuts from that event. How do I make it so the edits only happen to specific clips? So a lot of times if you do editing, let's say we have one audio file that's being used repeatedly in a project, if we do a destructive process on that, it can affect all the other edits. But to prevent that, if you want to do editing on only one particular instance of that, you could go to your preferences, and this is an option that's enabled by default that most people, it's one of those dialog windows that will pop up, and then you could say, you know, don't show this again. But if you go to editing to audio, and you'll see on processing shared clips, just choose, you could have it open the options dialog box, or you could have it automatically create new version. So if I do processing on one clip that's being used multiply or multiple times within a particular project, and I only wanted that processing to affect that one particular instance that's selected, I would choose create new version, or I could have it prompted, or we could just have it process everything every time that that audio file is being used in a project. So once again, go to your preferences to editing audio, and you could just choose create new version, and that will just change that behavior by default. All right, great to see Michael Teams on the Hangout. He's bringing ice cream for everyone. That's good to know. All right, great to see Millard Brown as well. All right, so Razel checking in from Denmark. All right, great to read that Jeff Zabelski's gotten his second COVID shot. That's great. All right. So I just see a question from Delif Renderath. Where are these questions posted? So the questions are just posted directly in the chat field. So sometimes it's behind what the actual questions are in real time because I can't talk that fast. So, but all the questions are coming from the chat field. All right, so see Millard Brown's been playing with the Oberheim 8 voice simulation plugin that just came out. It's absolutely massive, great sounds, but it's a bit CPU hungry. Well, you know, the my college, we had an Oberheim 8 voice, so it was a wonderful instrument. So hope you have fun with that. It probably takes a lot of processing to get all those great sounds. And my boss who hired me like almost 30 years ago, he was director of marketing at Oberheim, so I always have a soft spot for Oberheim. All right, so we have a question. Can a Mac Pro with 16 cores, will Cubase utilize all these cores? Yes. So once again, but make sure that, you know, depending on how your project is loaded up, you know, how plugins can be spread across cores, you know, could make a difference, but yes, Cubase will use all of those cores. Okay, going through more questions. See that Michael Teams is giving Jan a double scoop of Dutch chocolate ice cream for his Cubase index site. So. All right, great to see that Alexander Plasko is still here. All right. All right, so we have from Sub 403 question: is there a MIDI logical preset that would extend MIDI note until the next note? All right, so let's say if I wanted to do, and I often do this on bass parts. So let's say if I wanted the bass notes to automatically extend, so there's not a, you could probably make a logical editor to do that, or you could probably just go to under MIDI functions and choose legato, and that will automatically do that. If your material is kind of more chord based, so let's say if I wanted to just come over here, let's say, so let's say if I wanted all these chords to automatically extend to the next note starts, if you go to the lengths menu here, you could just say extend. So you could just say apply legato, and that will kind of automatically extend until the next note starts. And that's from the lengths tab in the MIDI key editor. So if you just kind of come over here, you can see where the notes are stopping short. So let's say if I just wanted to come here, and we'll change the length of all the notes here, make them all a bit shorter. So now when I just do apply legato, that will just do it across. So you don't even have to do a logical editor preset for that. Okay, so we have a question from Jeff Zabelski. Cubase 11 opens with safe mode window. The application was terminated unexpectedly with option to deactivate all third-party VST plugins. I'm importing old SX projects into new build is why. So generally what that is showing you is that there was a plugin that's trying to be used that's crashing the system. And a lot of people would kind of get stuck in a loop where they couldn't open Cubase because a plugin was crashing it. So at this point, what you have the option is if you're potentially getting stuck in this loop where Cubase won't launch because a plugin is preventing it, that with one selection, if a plugin is causing that you have the option to bypass all the plugins. So you could open a project, remove plugins, save it, perhaps under a different name, and then be able to open that project without it kind of having to access a particular plugin. So that's kind of the intention of the safe mode. Right, reading through all of my different questions and discussions. Thanks for all the great comments. If you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well. All right, so we have a question from Lawrence regarding the external clock setting. I have a Black Lives micro clock connected to my Mo2 interface and some mic pre's, and my DM2000 PC is connected to Mo2 via Thunderbolt. Cubase on external clock or not. So you could, if you run it on internal clock, it's basically going to be using probably your Mo2. But if you wanted the clock to, you could choose an external clock, and that way, if you wanted the Black Lion clock to be the master clock for your studio, or if you wanted the DM2000, you could kind of choose. So, and then you could tell Cubase, where it's getting the clock source from. So, and basically you could just say it's getting clock from my Mo2, which is, following the clock, from the DM2000 or the Black Lion clock. So it could depend on how your clocking is set up. So a lot of people may have like the Black Lion clock and then feed that out to your Mo2 or feed and to your DM2000, or you may say, okay, I really like the DM2000 clock, and I want the Black Lion to distribute that clock. So it could really kind of depend on how you have it set up. So, if you want, and how you want your Mo2 to be configured. So if you're going analog from your DM2000 to your Mo2, or if you're going digital, if you're going digital, you definitely want the clocks to be synchronized. But so it could depend, and it could depend, Lawrence, on your exact configuration. If you're using the Black Lion clock as the master for the Mo2 and the DM2000, or if it's acting as a clock distribution from your Mo2 to your other device. So it gets complicated. I wish there was an easy answer. All right, so we have a question, how to avoid Cubase scanning plugins at every startup. Thank you. So when Cubase starts up for the very first time, it actually will do like a quick diagnostic test and measure the latency of the plugins. So generally it doesn't do that every single time, but a lot of times, you may have an operating system update, a graphics driver update, and that could cause problems in stability within your plugins and how your plugins interact with different components. So that's why, you'll see, most programs will scan the plugins on startup, but they may not show it to you. So, I think that's kind of the intention of it. All right, great to see Ted Springman on a hangout from Sherman Oaks. All right, wonderful to see the tuba guy back. He just finished his master's thesis. Congratulations on that. All right, and Captain Energy Music is also joined. So we see any word on MIDI 2.0. So, we have some of the components, the VST, plugin specification was updated. So there's a lot of components, we're kind of, the whole MIDI 2 scenario is kind of a chicken and eggs scenario at this point. It could be, maybe that's not a fair analogy. So a lot of the MIDI 2.0 aspects are, coming, I think, in future hardware, but there's not a lot of hardware that does it. And as far as, with MIDI polyphonic expression, Cubase has done that for years already. We kind of pioneered the whole concept with note expression. That really kind of was the genesis for, the MPE functionality. But when we get into like the different, I forget what they're calling it, where you could have kind of like more of an extensive handshake between hardware synths so that they kind of operate more in a plug-in format. But within the VST3 specification, long time ago, for like 12 years, we've already not been bound by a lot of the aspects of the MIDI spec, the previous MIDI spec, so you could already have more than 128 velocity layers if you're so inclined. So we're just kind of waiting for a lot of hardware components, but I know that our developers are, actively keeping, coordinating with the engineering teams at Yamaha, so we'll just have to wait and see as more hardware comes out that supports it. All right. So you may hear my son enjoying his spring break in the background. Sorry about that. He's having fun. Excuse me. Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button, so I'll concur. Okay, so we have a question from Newark, New Jersey. Is there a way to have more than one project active at the same time, i.e. switch between projects faster than the bolt icon? So currently you have multiple projects open, but as you mentioned, the bolt icon that we see in the upper left-hand corner, that determines which project is active. So, but currently, that is the way to load and unload all the data necessary for starting a project. So, sometimes, if you have faster, if you have an SSD drive, if you're doing a lot of samples, that could greatly speed up the opening time. But, currently we have, I think if you had two projects open, that could cause, like when you hit play, do you want both projects to play? So I think it makes sense, but there's ways to, if you don't have like an SSD drive, if that's taking a while, or you're an orchestral composer, it's just going to take a while. But you can, open up projects, and when you go to open a project, you often get prompted with, I wanted to go here. Do you want to activate the project? And you could say no, and you could still copy data from this project to another project. But currently, it's one active project at a time. So. Okay, so we just see from Jeff Zabelski question. I can't get the same settings from HSO, violin solo, viola solo, cello solo, trio. The expression maps don't work right anymore. MIDI tracks versus instrument tracks. One doesn't apply the expression maps. So, both MIDI tracks and instrument tracks will work the same way. But if you're going back from previous versions, at one point HSO was its own standalone instrument, and then it had migrated to a sound set that worked inside of the Hallian Sonic and Hallian families. So it could be that maybe those particular projects that you're having problems with were for the previous Hallian symphony, the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra player, and not playing back directly inside of the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra sound set for Hallian Sonic. So that could be the difference, Jeff. So maybe if you kind of look around that way, that could be, and when it's referencing that plugin to Hallian Symphonic Orchestra player, that could be causing maybe some of the problems. All right, so you see a nice comment from Jan at cubaseindex.com. Says, I think Greg is going to set a new standard for our Hangout show. We'll be all over YouTube. So I'm glad you guys are finding it useful, and hope everyone's learning some new tricks. And if you learn something new, make sure that you hit the like button. All right. Okay, so we see from UMF TV Roblox, just got Cubase first time, so 6. So welcome to our Hangout. We hope to see you more, and whatever questions you have, just enter them in on the chat field. Okay, we just see a question from John. Hi, is there a way when duplicating a guitar track, panning the two to the far left and right, but having the duplicated track slightly different so it sounds as if it's a double tracked guitar? All right, so we just jump to. Okay, so let's say if I have this guitar part, I'll just solo this one. All right, so let's say we'll pan this hard left, or let's pan this hard right, and I'll just copy it up here. And we'll pan the top one hard left. So let's say we now have these. What I see some people do is, just do like a little bit of like track delay, and you can do this in milliseconds. So if you want to come here. So let me just go ahead and pan this one so you'll get the full effect. All right, and So this will be pan left. This will be pan, let's say, all the way to the right. So sometimes just doing like a little bit of like this little track delay setting can get you a really nice effect. So that's at 40 milliseconds, and can kind of take the same double track guitar and let's say if I put it at 0 and we'll just rewind. So you're not really gaining too much, but say minus 43. That could give you a nice effect. It takes, without having to do a duplicate performance, when you don't have maybe a duplicate performance, that could be a great little trick just to do like a little bit of a track delay on one, and that could help. And we see Robbie Bowling mentioned that with the UA platform that you could hide plugins that you don't own and show the ones that you do own. So. Okay, so we should see a question. How do you get your download access code? So as soon as you purchase your license, you can, so when you purchase a license electronically from a dealer or the Steinberg online shop, you get a download access code. If you purchase a box version of Cubase, like at a music dealer, in the box, you will have a download access code, and that you could enter into your My Steinberg account, and that will generate a license for you, and that will allow you to get access to the download as well. So that will give you, so your download access code once entered in. So if you go to your My Steinberg account, just enter that in, and you'll be all set to go. All right, great to see Tan Mei on the Hangout. All right, so I just see a question. Can you also use 32-bit plugins with 32-bit float mode? So when this could be very confusing because, the terminology is kind of, we see 32 and 64, and obviously 64 must be twice as good or twice as better. But when we deal with 32-bit plugins, those are kind of like the older plugin generation that was limited in its computer memory, where the plugin itself could only access, depending on your system, 2 or 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now it's not uncommon. You see in the discussion here, people are running 128 gigs of RAM, and that needs to for a plugin to be able to access more memory, that needs to be a 64-bit. And we'll call it like 32-bit memory addressing, 64-bit memory addressing. So the terms get thrown around interchangeably, which is confusing. So 32-bit memory addressing plugins are kind of almost about 18 years old at this point. So those aren't used, and they cause a lot of system instability. Now, the processing engine, so when we add effects and EQs on particular tracks, that the processing engine can be, in Cubase has always been traditionally 32-bit floating point, but was raised with version 10 to 64-bit precision. So that, the processing of the audio engine doesn't really have any correlation or direct relation with the memory addressing. So, but now just about all plugins are 64-bit, and we have the processing of like when we have fades or reverb tails to process those with double precision. So the two, while they sound like they're related, they're not really related. But so you could always use the memory addressing of the plugin format is not contingent or have any effect on the processing precision of the audio engine. But in general, stay away from 32-bit memory address plugins. So they'll often just be referred to as 32-bit. All right, let's read through some more comments and questions. Question, is it possible to change the name of MIDI logical custom presets? Also, where are they stored on Mac? So I think we did this on the last Hangout that it wasn't stored. That you couldn't just rename the plugin, but let's take a look at the storage location on Mac. So let me just go to my Finder. I think it's going to be in your preferences. So I'm going to go to Finder. I'm going to hold down the Option key because Apple doesn't think I'm responsible enough, unless I know that, to get to my library folder. Okay, so, and if you go to library, you want to go to preferences, and then you'll see probably Steinberg, Cubase. All right, so we have Cubase 11, and in here I think we'll have presets. And logical edit. And this is where all of your user presets are stored here. So go to your library, to preferences, to Cubase 11, to presets, and then look under logical editor, logical edit. And then you could see all of your logical editor presets directly there. And you could change a name there if you wanted to. All right, so it's great to see Speedy on a Hangout. Hope you're doing well. All right, so we have a question. Every time I open the media bay, the folders take a long time to open for the first time. Is there a way to improve the speed of this? So it could be a preference that is set. So, when you go to our media bay, we could just access kind of our different folders. So if I wanted to come over here to, my VST sound, and let's go over here to my different folders. This is how mine is working. Now, one of the things that you could have set up that some people have set up by default, if you go to the preferences, we can just come over here and then go to preferences to media bay. And there is a preference for scan folders only when media bay is open. Probably uncheck that. So if you have that checked, every time that you go through, open up media bay, that's when it starts doing its scan. And if you close it, open and close it, it never finishes its initial scan. So once it's finished its initial scan, then all that information is automatically going to be referenced. So just make sure that you don't have, again, preferences to media bay, that you don't have scan folders only when media bay is open. And this will the scanning will go on in the background. So, it may take a couple times while you have Cubase open for it to complete its scan if you have, tens of thousands of audio files and samples and presets. So just be aware of that. But make sure you don't have that preset enabled. All right, so we see sub 403 is going to try to make it to our Zoom session next Tuesday. So it'd be great to see you. All right, so we see comment from Tim Weinheimer. Thanks, Greg, for the last hangout, for showing us how to group effects track so easy to set now. Thanks. All right. Okay, so just see, got to be a better way of creating drum maps in slate drums. Can you help? So a lot of times, depending on if it's, I'm not sure if they're VST3, but the one thing that you may try, but I know with Groove Agent, I could come over here. So let's say I open up a Groove Agent kit. Okay, so let's say I have, this particular kit going on. And I wanted to see the drum map. I could just come right over here and let's go to the first. And then you could also, if it's a VST3, there is the capability of this where you could create a drum map from the instrument. And now when we go to edit on this particular event, the drum map from that particular instrument. So you could try to see if you do that. But once depending on how many drum sounds you have, and I've created drum maps in the past, like if you look at the drum maps for like the Alesis D4, I just made them probably in 1992 or 3 or something like that. But, but if you go to your drum map, just get your drum map set up. And at this point, you could, just click on the sound and find out what each MIDI note is and just type it in and save it once and store that as a track preset. But, once you have that drum map created, if you're using kind of the same consistent drum tones, just, create the drum map once. If it doesn't work with the, create drum map from instrument function. All right. Okay, just reading. Okay, so question from Tanmay. Way to automatically change project folder name from untitled to the name you save your CPR file as. So there isn't a way to do that because, saving your project folder name is actually kind of a part of the operating system. If you're working on this, like let's say if we do it, choose to do a new project, in version 11, this behavior change where it'll just prompt for the project folder location. But, once you do this, you could just type in, the project folder name here. So you could just say, okay, let's create a folder. And, because this part of, the process is just using the file browser that's part of your Windows or Mac OS. And you could just, give it a name. So let's just call it Tanmay, and then you could just change the name within your operating system. But, just be, try to name the folder and name the project, shortly, with the same name to keep your file management kind of working for you as opposed to against you. Okay. Okay, so I see some discussion maybe running like Cubase 8.5 to get 32-bit VST plugins. So I just see a comment. I have Cubase 11 Pro 8.5 doesn't have. If you have your Cubase 11 Pro, you could always download, like earlier versions of Cubase, back to SX1 if you wanted to, and install that, and your Cubase 11 license will work for earlier versions of it. Okay, so we have a question from Michael Teams, and since he's been generous enough to pass out ice cream for people, and he's just a great guy, we'll answer it for him. Howdy, Greg. We would like to know